a free copy of the new guide, Prostate Secrets, that pulls back the curtain on the prostate pill industry. Learn what is really in these pills. Which pill has over 987 adverse event reports filed against it with the FDA? It's shocking. Learn the one food to avoid that is a prostate killer, and discover the 3 so-called health foods that destroy your prostate. Get your free copy at prostatesecrets.com. That's prostatesecrets.com. This free guide will show you how to end your prostate problems without drugs or surgery, 5 important things to do to protect your prostate, and much more. Warning, this guide is controversial and may be offensive to some readers as it pulls no punches. So go to prostatesecrets.com. Prostatesecrets.com. That's prostatesecrets.com.
Coming up on the Ben Ferguson podcast, this may be the biggest week for the GOP that we've had in years. As Trump may announce he's running for the White House, the GOP is going after the Biden crime family, and that may just be the beginning. Download the Ben Ferguson podcast now.
El Paso's News Radio 690 KTSM.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
Jelly. Jelly adjective. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt US Kids, and the Ad Council.
Like where the balance is. Thank you all so very much for joining us here for our special election coverage here on Talk El Paso, airing live on News Radio 690 KTSM. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Thank you for tuning in however you may be doing so, be it on air, online, live streaming through the free and reliable iHeartRadio app, or join us over on the various social media pages, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. Should be all up there now. Lorenzo Colon chiming in over there. Not specifically taking comments or calls this evening, but if you got some burning comments or questions, you can, of course, join the conversation over there. But, of course, joining me here in studio, joined by Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, as well as Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc. We are going to be tracking the results and some of the very interesting circumstances that may come out of them throughout both the night and with both some of the local results as well as the balance of power nationally. And, of course, one of the big questions that is coming out of that is who will retain control of the House of Representatives, and one of the tighter questions potentially is who exactly will still retain control of the Senate as well. Control there being a little bit more of a tenuous idea, as it has been technically been 51% this entire term of office in the White House. But again, that'll be one of the things we're tracking this evening here. So, of course, on some of the local races, as we now have polls having just closed about 19 minutes ago, we are still looking at more of the unofficial early voting results. And some of the other ones I wanted to delve a little bit further into is that, of course, the City of El Paso bond and the little bit of a mixed bag, looking at the moment like more towards yes on the Proposition A, the roughly $242 million for streets, but then kind of a pretty close, pretty dang near even on Propositions B and C for parks and environmental issues and sustainability, respectively. But there's, of course, another bond that is on these results as well, and that is the Canutillo ISD bond election, and that one was a bit closer in the $200 million range, and it's looking like that one, again, based on early voting results, is going to be a no.
Yeah, looking at the numbers, it seems like both Bond A and Bond B for Canutillo ISD are going to go down. If those of you who haven't been following the race as closely, there are 3 candidates who are running in the Board of Trustees election that were also against the bonds.
Yes.
And they were also accused by the superintendent of Canutillo Independent School District of illegally making signs to advertise against the bond and sharing them along with their electioneering packets.
Yeah, that was interesting. And driving around essentially the Canutillo area, such as down Talbot Drive, was seeing a mix of both the vote yes and vote no positions on there. It was there. I can't really remember the last time I saw on a bond or proposition like that there were not just like, I mean, may have seen individual signs, things out like that, things saying like, hey, like on a business front or in someone's yards, but these were produced signs and in numbers, because I saw them in a number of places with uniformity, and there's not exact data point I can point to, but can't really recall seeing something along those lines for a bond specifically recently.
No, there were some assumptions the last time the bond came up that similar behavior was taking place, but this time this is a very systematic. I live in Canutillo, and the
Mhm.
signs against the bond are everywhere, and they're missing the who paid for them tagline that's required by the state. So it
Yeah,
was
of
very
course.
interesting to see what was going on there, and actually looking at the board of trustees race. Some of those candidates that were anti-bond are doing quite well in the early results.
Again, that'll be one of the things we're watching here. But of course, there's a whole lot more to be looked at beyond just that. We've got some of the other local races, including what's going on with some of the congressional representation. Though in the Texas 16th congressional district, of course, that'll be a major one. But then in the Texas 23rd congressional district, El Paso is an increasing part of that district. It encompasses the entire eastern border of El Paso County, but not entirely of the way. It's a kind of the urban versus unurbanized parts of the county is kind of the way it breaks down, given that the 23rd stretches all the way to the outskirts of San Antonio and is huge in that way, and also why that race kind of coincides with a lot of focus going on with some of those other kind of South Texas races, the congressional districts 15, 28, and 34, that all kind of snake their way around into the tip of Texas, the bottom tip of Texas, so to speak here. So we're keeping our eye on that way as well. But one thing we can say from the local election results, some of the initial ones when it comes to the congressional representation, again, looking at the El Paso County Elections Department, of course, one of the questions would be for the Texas 16th, again, their incumbent Democrat Veronica Escobar being challenged another time by Republican nominee Irene Armendariz Jackson. And there, again, based on the early election numbers, we are looking at some, again, trajectory being sent of a rough night ahead for the Armendariz Jackson campaign.
Yeah, and I don't think this will be much of a surprise given the history of that district. I believe it's only been won by a Republican once in its entire history. That was back in the 1960s. It's been solidly Democratic since. And at this point, looking at the initial results coming out here, the initial voting, you have Irene Armendariz Jackson with about 35% of the vote, and U.S. Representative, the incumbent, Veronica Escobar, with 64% of the vote.
And again, this is with there not being any, there are a handful of districts that have completely reported at this point here, but I would say the majority at this point have not begun the reporting. Again, polls closing within the last not even half an hour just yet. So we have a lot more, and most of those polling districts looking like a lot of them are on the outskirts of the county. So this is just the unofficial early voting results. Of course, we will be going through the rest of the night as more of the election day voting results come out. We'll get more of the percentage numbers. We're still looking at about 20% of the electorate that turned out to vote for early voting. So I've got my fingers crossed that we will be looking at more than, if we could get to 50%, I'd consider that a dream personally. But in the meantime, we'll be tabulating and looking at those results as the tabulations continue throughout the rest of the night here. But we're going to go ahead and take that next break here real quick. Coming out of this break, should be looking at, of course, some of the things going on with the governor's race and some of the questions asking about local results. Remember, there are local results that are coming in for the gubernatorial race, but of course, El Paso not in the driver's seat whenever it comes to those. So those we'll be having to look at statewide. So some of those numbers being brought up here, generally not going to be the most important factor, though there were some interesting billboards I was noticing, such as saying, if everyone turns out for Beto, he will win, which has kind of been a thought in previous elections. Back in 2018, that was kind of the back of hands, back of the note kind of thing about, well, if El Paso turns out, O'Rourke will win. And of course, that didn't quite work. There was a decent turnout in 2018, but it was not exactly a delivering of the victory at that point in time for O'Rourke. That obviously didn't happen.
Well, it seems that the kind of perennial hope is that there's this sort of wave. There's this group of voters out there that just isn't usually engaged, and if we could engage him, maybe he could win. Maybe it's young voters, maybe it's Hispanic voters, and it just hasn't turned out that way yet.
Yeah, and as much as there has been quite a lot of focus in different ways on different voting blocks, I mean, anytime Governor Greg Abbott has been coming to town, he has talked about focusing on border areas, focusing on breaking through what was talking about the blue wall, so to speak. So that's one of the questions that will be coming up here, but we'll talk more about that. Again, taking that next break of this hour right now, you are tuned into live local special election coverage here on Talk El Paso on News Radio 690 KTSM. So more on the results, more on those, and sticking around with our in-house experts, Todd Curry, professor of political science, UTEP, and of course, Robbie Gray, editor of El Pasoing. Back with more here on Talk El Paso. Election night coverage going through 9 p.m. today here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
El Paso's News Radio 690 KTSM.
Hello, I'm Erica Castillo with this KFOX 14 News Update. The city of El Paso has three separate propositions on the ballot, totaling $272.48 million this election day. The propositions come as a result of a survey conducted by the city of El Paso, in which some El Pasoans reported being most concerned about streets, parks, and climate. There is a $246.5 million proposition for street improvements, including new sidewalks, streetscape, traffic controls, as well as planning. $135 million is for resurfacing and reconstruction of the top 50 most traveled roads in the city. $35 million is for residential resurfacing. If the entire bond were to pass, including $2 million for parks and $5 million for renewable and energy efficient resources, the potential monthly impact for each taxpayer in El Paso would be about $5 a month or $60 a year. However, this amount can change and is projected to increase over the next several years, according to the city. I'm Erica Castillo with this KFOX 14 News Update.
Today, let me weigh in on Elon Musk's plan to charge $8 a month for the blue check mark and a verified Twitter account. I'm Kim Commando, brought to you by T-Mobile. Their advanced network now goes farther than ever before. Visit T-Mobile.com/55 today. Indignant celebrities, Valerie Bertinelli, Stephen King, the disgraced Kathy Griffin, all whining about spending $8 a month for a blue check mark are simply ridiculous. Living in their make-believe bubble, they have no clue it takes money to run a company. And Twitter, founded in 2006, did not have its first profitable year until 2019, 13 straight years of losing money, and today it's still hemorrhaging. After half the staff was let go, Twitter's founder, Jack Dorsey, apologized for, quote, growing the company too fast. In the real world, not everyone needs a verified account. The ones screaming the loudest over $8 are the ones that are most able to pay it. Remember, nothing is truly free. Try my new daily fun tech podcast called Kim Commando today. Does it make sense that the same company who controls half of all online retail also passively eavesdrops on your private conversations at home? What about the idea that a single company controls 90% of internet searches, runs your email service, and gets to track everything you do on your smartphone? Big tech is powerful, and they profit by exploiting your personal data. It's time to put a layer of protection between your online activity and those tech juggernauts. When you run ExpressVPN on your device, the software hides your IP address, making your activity harder to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts all your internet data to keep you safe from hackers without slowing your connection. Just download the app on your phone or computer, tap one button, and you're protected. Go to expressvpn.com/Kim to get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/Kim to get 3 extra months for free. That address again, expressvpn.com/Kim.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along, which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/free. That's ziprecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter.com/free.
11 presidents, the Pope, and dozens of world leaders have shared their thoughts about matters of faith with one person, Billy Graham. Be sure to catch this week's edition of Our American Stories on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This report is sponsored by the Our American Stories podcast.
What if there was an app where you could listen to this radio station plus hundreds more from across the country? What if that app had every song from every artist that you love, along with the biggest podcast in the world?
Impossible.
Well, we couldn't find an app with it all. So we made it. And then we made it completely free. The free iHeartRadio app is the future of audio, and it's available now in your app store. Listen to what you want, when you want, wherever you want to. Download the free iHeartRadio app for all the music, radio, and podcasts you love.
News Radio 690 KTSM.
Thank you all very much for joining us here for Talk El Paso in our special election night coverage, bringing you live results through 9 p.m. tonight on both the local races as well as checking on some of the big national ones. So we'll be delving back into that here. Comments are coming in over on our social media. You can join the conversation over here. But tonight, mostly focused on the information that we have coming in, and it is turning into a torrent as we have a lot of different ones to look at. We mentioned a couple of what are the results on both some of the local races as well as some of the gubernatorial ones, and want to mention that, but also some, of course, what is going on in the congressional races for our area. Of course, polls have been closed within the last half hour, just over half an hour ago here in El Paso, and in the Mountain Time Zone, still a lot of preliminary being looked at there, but have some trends that we can look at and we will continue to discuss here, and a lot of comments coming in over on the social media. People want to discuss things there, look at what results you are seeing. Again, mostly focused on what results our numbers we are coming in as our focus this evening, but of course welcome to chime in over on those other pages. Of course, joining me here in studio to help me with that discussion and break down all of these results, we do have Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, as well as Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc. We'll be getting more into some of the local races, but of course some of the ones we are looking at with that early voting results, about 20% of the registered voters in El Paso turning out for that, which is a good start, hoping we get a lot more, but we'll of course be furiously checking those results throughout the rest of the evening. Next update probably within the next hour or so, but in the meantime, of course, a lot of specific races to be looked at here in Texas as well as New Mexico. So I want to mention a little bit about some of the congressional representation going on here. Of course, El Paso very much in the driver's seat whenever it comes to the Texas 16th congressional district, that of course Democratic incumbent Veronica Escobar representing that, of course, with Republican challenger Irene Armendariz Jackson. We discussed that a minute here, but the statewide races, the ones that El Paso is one of many in voting in on, again, with the votes just now coming in or starting to come in from El Paso, there are some trends that can be seen, and there have been a couple of questions coming up about the percentages. I'm thinking some of those percentages showing essentially a 2-to-1 vote margin for O'Rourke over Abbott. Those are looking primarily as the local results, because statewide, it's a little bit different than that. Governor Greg Abbott, according to NBC News specifically, very much in the driver's seat at this point. I mean, there is going to be more to be looked at and still being put as too early to call by many of it, but about 54% of the results here in Texas so far, with Greg Abbott at about 51.8% versus O'Rourke's 47.1%. So that split has been increasing somewhat as more of those results come in. Of course, that has been one of the big campaigns to watch, and there's the watch party going on here in El Paso tonight, being held by the O'Rourke campaign. So O'Rourke himself here in El Paso to do this, and won't be able to check in on that campaign or anything, but we will of course be expecting our news partners over there at KFOX 14 to be bringing more of that kind of live coverage at the actual watch parties. But I mean, these are not surprising results. These are pretty well in line with what a lot of the polling had been coming into election day, of that close but still a definable margin. I think the specific last poll I was looking at when it came to potential voters here in Texas right before Election Day, November 7th specifically, was putting about a roughly 9-point split between Abbott and O'Rourke in favor of Abbott, with a roughly 4% margin of error. This had been something being said by that campaign, because I get all of the campaign emails from everyone, because I sign up for them because I choose to do that. But there was a lot of statistical tie, those kind of narratives trying to be talked about here. So there was, of course, that last gasp, but whether or not it'll actually pan out, one of the things that I've been more interested in as we still wait for these results to come in has been the machine. We were discussing that a little bit, because essentially you can trace this back to I mean, of course, the congressional races when O'Rourke did represent El Paso in the Texas 16 congressional district, but it really took off, and this machine being built, I'm referring to, ever since 2018 and that Senate race.
Yeah, so Beto O'Rourke has an outstanding political machine. He can run statewide races. He can do better than most would think in a state as red as Texas. And it's interesting because his machine is not the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party statewide is very weak. He sort of has this machine that he's built from the ground up. And I find it interesting that in 3 races now, the Senate in 2018, I guess the presidential in 2020, and the current gubernatorial race, he himself has significantly underperformed.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, there's been a lot of different narratives being spun when it comes to those level of results about how it wasn't quite enough, but it's better than Democrats have done in Texas for a while here, and that has kind of continued on. But the part that's been harder to see, the part that has been not exactly underground, but if you're not a part of it, there's no good way to view it, is what I'm getting at, has been that machine, the Powered by People, PXP, as it is often put on, that I get I think I got 3 texts today from that organization, among other things. So that very much, I mean, the block walking, the amount of fundraising, that was, of course, one of the big things going into election night, was the outperforming in that metric of the O'Rourke campaign versus the Abbott campaign.
Yeah, I think just looking at the numbers, I think Beto O'Rourke is going to have to ask himself, if the numbers continue to pan out the way they look like they will election night, is this the last one? Is this the last try? And if it is the last try, what are you going to do with Powered by People? Is that actually going to become the mechanism that you can use to launch other Democratic candidate for statewide office? And could Beto O'Rourke basically become a power broker for Democratic candidates statewide? It seems that he'd be in the position to do that. He just has not been able to get over the hump of being able to win a statewide election, but he has an excellent mechanism by which to launch someone over that hump now.
That is, again, one of the very interesting points to be made here, that machine, that powering of it, and this question starts being, might be what's the best way to use it? Is it to put it into one campaign, or start using it to build up that base, particularly in contravention of what the stated Republican efforts are in the state of focusing on blue strongholds? So a couple of things I want to make sure to mention here is that as we're looking at that balance of power, of course, the control of Congress is not exactly a foregone conclusion, but a lot of specific expectations. According to, of course, NBC News here, we are looking at the Republicans so far projected to secure 113 congressional seats, and Democrats so far 65. Of course, 218 are required for control. So these are the ones, as, of course, congressional representation is up for re-election every 2 years. No safe seats, so to speak, as opposed to Senate seats, of which there are only a select number, about a third of them roughly, that are up for election this time around. So each of these, their own battleground, though some are expected to be more competitive than not here, including, of course, some of the local ones, but we'll be checking more in on those. So again, currently tallying about 113 Republican seats secured and 65 Democrat seats secured for the House of Representatives, and a lot more will be coming with that. And of course, some of those battlegrounds right within our coverage area, including the New Mexico 2nd District. We have, of course, had on the incumbent previously, Republican Yvette Harrell, in her term of office there on her positions. And some of the results looking at so far are putting her Democratic challenger, Gabe Vasquez, a bit ahead there. Robbie, were you looking at some of the results there of that one? Okay, so we'll come back to that one here. So tell you, we'll go ahead and take that break right now, refresh, and get some of those numbers up where we're looking at here. We've been looking a lot at the Texas Secretary of State numbers here so far. So we'll come back and look more at New Mexico 2nd as well, and how that plays. And of course, their polls closing within the last half hour as well, Mountain Time Zone and all. So we'll get more to that. So stay tuned for more here on this special election coverage for the Talk El Paso. So stay tuned for more here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
The midterms are here. With so much at stake, MSNBC has the in-depth coverage and analysis to give you a greater understanding. Watch coverage of the 2022 midterms, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
It's important to live healthy and to be with the right healthcare team.
For us, that's WellMed.
WellMed doctors get to know us, and they help us to live healthy. They coordinate with specialists and the pharmacy so we get the care we deserve.
Because your health matters.
The Medicare annual enrollment period is October 15th to December 7th. Visit mydocmatters.com or call 888-824-9568. Calling this number will connect you to the brokerage, a licensed insurance agency that can answer your Medicare questions and help you choose a plan. We accept original Medicare and Medicare Advantage plans.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along, which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/free. That's ziprecruiter.com/free. ziprecruiter.com/free.
We can all do our part to stay safe on Texas roads. Always cross the street at intersections and crosswalks and wait for the walk signal. Stay alert and remember, it's safest to look left, right, left before you cross. Be safe. Walk smart. A message from TxDOT.
Most of the time, traffic is pretty good. But there are times when traffic can be pretty bad. No, I mean like really bad. Almost, but more like an asteroid's gonna hit the city and everyone's trying to get out of town at once and nobody's car is moving and people are running down the highway clutching their kids and whatever belongings they can grab. Yep, now you got it. It's times like these you need your severe traffic station. Traffic and weather all day. Stay informed with El Paso's News Radio, 690 KTSM.
From the KFOX 14 Severe Weather Center, this is Chief Meteorologist Sandra Diaz. Our next weather maker is set to arrive overnight Wednesday. Now, that's when the colder air begins to move in time for Thursday. But in the meantime, we will have winds increasing through the day on Wednesday. Once the front passes through, the winds will gradually decrease on Friday. Log on to kfoxtv.com for your latest forecast.
News Radio 690 KTSM El Paso.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for Talk El Paso special election night coverage as we are getting into the results and tracing a lot of what is happening both with the local results and some of those national balances of power. So waiting for that next release should be coming up here within the next 15, 20 minutes or so of the next local results, at least historically. We're going to be finding out a lot more about that and what some of those numbers, trajectories being sent, some interesting impacts in the local races, but want to take a minute and talk some more about some of these statewide races. And so, of course, we talked a little about the Texas 16th Congressional District with Veronica Escobar, the Democratic incumbent, firmly in the driver's seat there. In terms of these results, 64% to Republican challenger Irene Armendariz-Jackson's 35.5%. Of course, the Texas 23rd Congressional District with incumbent Tony Gonzalez. The voting in El Paso going not in his favor, more in favor of Democratic John Lira challenger. But, of course, that is a very much outside of this district race or outside of El Paso County race as well. So check more in on that. So, of course, also wanted to talk about what is going on in the New Mexico 2nd Congressional District. So I'll talk more about that. We are, of course, joined here in studio by Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc., as well as Todd Curry, UTEP political science professor. And so when we're looking at some of those results from the New Mexico 2nd District, there we have Republican incumbent Yvette Harrell with a Democrat challenger, Gabe Vasquez. So what are some of the early results looking like there?
So looking at the very early results, Gabriel Vasquez is leading 59% over the incumbent Yvette Harrell. If you remember back to the last election, Yvette Harrell was kind of heralded as that was an unexpected, not necessarily unexpected result, but a breakout result in the in the New Mexico 2nd. And so the fact that there is at least a very close challenge this time in a very preliminary data, only 40,000 votes counted so far.
Right.
Bodes well that the New Mexico 2nd is going to be a consistent battleground race going forward.
I mean, that would be an interesting result there. Of course, the previous one, I was talking about this earlier today, with the, at that point, Democrat incumbent Xochitl Small and the Republican challenger at that point, Yvette Harrell. Quite a lot of time spent on El Paso airwaves. I remember at least one person in our audience saying, I hope they write because I'll miss hearing about them. After that, it was quite prevalent. So we'll keep our eye on that one. But again, yeah, only according to our, of course, national news coverage with NBC News, looking about 22% of results in so far. So a long way to go there. And for the Texas 23rd Congressional District, kind of a similar split, but in the different direction. The incumbent Republican Tony Gonzalez there looking at about 55% with Democratic John Lear, a challenger, about 40% so far. But as much as we are also, of course, going to be looking at the gubernatorial results and what is going to be happening here in Texas with still a bit of a split, still being considered by some, including NBC, as being too early to call. O'Rourke trailing behind Abbott with about 53% of the vote, and O'Rourke about 46. But there's another impact to this congressional, not even just the congressional races, but the gubernatorial race that could have an impact right here at home, as much as any governor's policies definitely would affect us in all parts of the state. There's a very specific impact that, well, you all have even been doing some reporting on, right, Robbie?
Yeah, that's right. And it might be something that folks have overlooked here locally, but it would impact the district attorney, Von Rosales. So to set the stage a little bit here, there's a little background, but last winter, a murder defendant was freed from jail because a judge found one of her top prosecutors had vindictively sought a death penalty after being caught unprepared for trial.
Right.
That led to the defense attorney who represented the freed murder defendant to file a court petition to trigger a process that could lead to her removal. Right. That is in process at this point.
Absolutely.
But if that were to happen and the district attorney here locally were to be removed, the new district attorney would be selected whoever is governor.
So that has been one of the questions that has been coming up about kind of what happens next. Of course, we've got a fairly dramatic process that's going to be coming up in the meantime. I mean, very specifically, it's going to be going to a court trial. As mentioned, again, that actual process that was started by, again, previous guest on the show as well, the defense attorney that filed that petition, having been now accepted by the county attorney to move forward to that trial, will be being heard by a judge out of Odessa, though, and this was part I was not clear on yet. Is that going to be heard in El Paso, or is that going to be also out of the court of Odessa? Are you aware of that, Robbie?
I am not sure on that, but it is a pretty, I don't know if I want to say unprecedented, but it's certainly an unusual situation to see the district attorney facing a jury trial about her future. And it's a process I wasn't aware of in Texas until we've all gotten educated on it here.
Yeah, so again, that's just one of those other and very specifically locally impacting parts of these elections here. So at least one other thing I want to mention as we head out to getting closer to that next break here is that, of course, we are looking at some of those nationwide results, more results coming in by the moment, including, of course, for New Mexico second, but that the GOP now looking at about 113 seats successfully secure for the House of Representatives. Democrats so far 73. Of course, we are talking primarily the East Coast. Some of those results still coming in, a lot of Midwest results coming in, including another one looking like out of Michigan, where they are calling it from NBC for McLean there, but there's still I mean, technically going on for a little while longer here in the West Coast. So that will be a long night looking at that specific question. But in the meantime, some of those other races that we want to mention that we're looking at here is even as we're waiting for that next bit of results, that next update on where El Paso races stand. I want to mention a couple of those here that for the City of El Paso bond, kind of a mixed bag in between. The difference is with the proposition number A looking like at the moment anyway, that it will be able to start being moved forward. That is, of course, the one that is going to be the roughly $242 million for streets and road improvements and repairs, looking at about 60% for to about roughly 40% against. And the City of El Paso bond proposition letter B, that one, of course, more focused on parks and recreation facilities, the roughly 20 million or so there, about 51% to roughly 48, 49%. So, and similar kind of things even for proposition number C, that more on sustainability and environmental impact, with about 49%, 49.6% for, and 50.3 against, 50.4 against. So that one will be some close ones to watch as we get through the rest of this evening, because, well, there's a lot more to come in a lot of these races. And again, still that very, very strong potential for a runoff or two within the city of El Paso releases and races. Pulling up a couple of those here. We're looking at very specifically for City of El Paso, District number 1. Again, based on the unofficial early voting results, Brian Kennedy strongly in the lead with about 6,000 votes, 42.8%. Next closest challenger, Annalisa Cordova Silverstein, with 25.3%. And then coming into a distant third, the next closest being Lauren Ferris at about 12%. And again, the interesting thing I want to point out here is that at the very least, based on these early voting results, we had an interesting situation in that race, that one of the candidates, and in fact, a sitting member of the El Paso Independent School District Board of Trustees, Freddie Cleo Avalos, dropped out of both the race as well as resigning from his position, citing essentially personal concerns here. And so he announced that after the point of which it could actually be removed from the ballot. Ballots were essentially printed. He was going to have to go on to based on election law. And he's actually, after the three candidates I just mentioned here, okay, there's one more, Dave Jones, with about 5.75% of the vote. So first through fourth are still in the race. And then number 5, Freddie Cleo Avalos, with about 5.3% of the vote, beating out still in the race challengers, Delarice DMB Montañez Berrios and Aaron Togg at 4.6 and 4% respectively. So going to be a long night for some of those candidates. That possibly one of the ones that's going to be going to that runoff, but another possibility there for district number 6 as well, with incumbent Claudia Lizette Rodriguez, and guest on the show in her own right as well, about 42.5% of the vote. Next closest there, former state rep, district out, essentially Art Fierro. But those are just some of the things that we are going to be looking at here. So when it comes to some of these city races, Robbie, of course, I mean, the bonds have been having a lot of concern and a lot of discussion along with them. But when it comes to, I mean, particularly some of the business perspective, when we're talking about the different candidates here, there's been a lot of different positions. We've had some on the show here. What would you say are some of the major issues that have been coming up for the kind of reporting that you all have been working on?
So I think many of the major issues here in El Paso for the business community are very similar to the major issues for the individuals here. And topping the list, I think, are rising costs. You hear a lot about concerns about inflation, about the costs of their products that they have to get, restaurants with their food, as well as staffing and how that has become more expensive. I hear that a lot in our reporting. Also, alongside that, focus on taxes. There's been concerns about, not just inflation, but also the rising taxes. And I think particularly with the city of El Paso, we hear concerns about that from businesses as well. But keep in mind, I mean, the business community is not one monolithic community with one opinion. You're going to find very, very different views. But on the, another thing we hear is quality of life issues. So while we're concerned about taxes, we're concerned about costs. I think folks want to see El Paso continue moving forward with some of the investments we have made here with the downtown development. And I think part of maybe what you're seeing with the bond with roads. I mean, that is a thing that impacts us every single day when we're commuting.
Oh, yeah.
We all see those bad roads. And frankly, for businesses, infrastructure like transportation is a very important issue.
Yeah, and transportation, I mean, as much as people can, of course, hear us in their cars and their vehicles, I mean, there are a lot of, I don't think anyone would be totally possessed of the idea that El Paso roads are perfect, paved with gold, nothing wrong with them. I mean, it's one of the biggest gripes that we end up hearing on this and our other programs. So that's why I guess I'm not totally surprised at that bond result, but maybe a little bit surprised at the closeness of the other ones of them, because there's a quote that has stayed with me from essentially the beginning, just before actually the tenure of current, of course, city manager Tommy Gonzalez, not to be confused with Tony Gonzalez, the representative, the current incumbent for the Texas 23rd Congressional District. Yes, we need more names in these district races here, a little bit too close for comfort in the way they can mess it up. But Tommy Gonzalez, one of the things that he said when he was actually coming on board, as much as there has been conversation about his contract, and there's actually been more than a little bit of that being kind of an undercurrent within some of these races within the city of El Paso, including the different council member seats, is that one of the things he said is that of all the places that he has lived and worked, El Paso is one of the places that most demands services like parks and things like that. And so that's why I think it's interesting, the results, again, based on the early voting, unofficial results, that it's about 50-50. It's kind of a coin flip at this point, which way it'll go for that proposition number B, focused on that, again, roughly in the $20 million range. But that's also been kind of a focus of this, not even this, the administrations that we've seen actually holding the mayorship of El Paso, but kind of consistently from, well, that of the city manager side of government.
Well, this might go back too with the concerns about costs and taxes. I mean, I think folks are sensitive about this. When I talk to not just people in the business community, you hear folks concerned about the increase in taxes, and of course, by spending on bonds, there may be some fatigue there.
Yeah, that's definitely been one of the other conversations we've been hearing here, but this is taking us pretty close to the top of the hour right now, so we're going to come back, check on some more of those results. Some of those results we're looking at nationally here, the balance of power whenever it comes to Congress, looking at Republicans actually being called by NBC 137 now, so we need to upgrade our graphic there. So 137 for Republicans so far when it comes to the House of Representatives, and actually 77 so far for Democrats. Again, as a note, there are the West Coast results about to start coming in, so we'll get a clearer picture of the total amount of it, but there are very much, again, the 218 seats being needed for the control of the House of Representatives, and one of the big questions that will be coming out of this night. One of the further ones will, of course, be the Senate, and we'll try to get to more of that here. But again, joining me here in studio, we are joined, of course, by Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc., as well as Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, talking more with them about some of these results and some of the meaning behind them. But I got to take that top of the hour break. Back after the top of the hour, getting into hour 2 of our live local election results show. So stay tuned for more here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along, which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/radio. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ZipRecruiter.com/radio. That's ZipRecruiter.com/radio. ZipRecruiter.com/radio.
It's a new day because COVID vaccines just got a big update. So all the big stuff coming up this fall? Well, now you can say, you bet I'll be there. Because updated COVID vaccines protect against both the original COVID virus and Omicron. And everyone 5 and older can get one. So this is a moment we've all been waiting for.
Find updated COVID vaccines at vaccines.gov. We can do this. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
Hey, listener. Welcome to Limu's Karaoke Lounge, where Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance so you only pay for what you need, and the music never stops. Hit it.
There's an emu with a full-time job. His partner's Doug, but Limu's the heartthrob. Grubs and worms, that's what Limu eats. Gotta fuel up to save you money and hit the streets.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Freedom of speech lives here.
To me, freedom of speech is being able to say anything you want.
El Paso's News Radio 690 KTSM. News on the hour and a half. Traffic and weather all day. News Radio 690 is KTSM AM El Paso, an iHeart radio station.
NBC News Radio, I'm Mark Mayfield. Polls are closing in 3 states at this hour. The list includes North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia. Republican J.D. Vance and Democratic Representative Tim Ryan are in a close race for the open Ohio Senate seat. The winner could push the balance of power in the Senate one way or the other. President Biden says today's GOP isn't your father's Republican Party.
This is a different breed of cat, and they care about your community about as much as, well, anyway, you've seen what you've got from that community.
Speaking on D.L. Hewley's radio show on Election Day, Biden said it's important to vote this year to stop ineffective MAGA Republicans from winning. Republican Rand Paul, the projected winner in the Kentucky Senate race. NBC News reports Paul will defeat Democrat Charles Booker. Paul has served in the Senate since being elected in 2010. Officials in Arizona say they have found a solution for earlier tabulation issues that happened at around 60 voting centers. Former President Trump urged voters to wait out any long lines.
Don't leave your line. Stay where you are. They say that the machines aren't working. They say that they're running out of paper in different locations throughout different states. There's a lot of bad things going on. Stay online. Do not leave.
County officials in Phoenix said technicians have changed the printer settings, which seem to shore up the issues. They added some of the printers at voting locations were not producing dark enough timing marks on the ballots. The change in settings has worked at 17 different voting locations, and technicians are working to fix the issues at the remaining locations. And most voters are unhappy with how things are currently going in the U.S. That's according to an exit poll by NBC News. It found 74% of those polled said they felt negatively about the way things are going around the country. Over 52% of Democrats polled said they were angry with the current trajectory of the U.S. Around 92% of Republicans polled said they were dissatisfied with the country's current situation. You're listening to the latest from NBC News Radio. Senate control comes down to tight races in 5 states in today's midterms. Arizona Senator Mark Kelly says he's pretty confident in his campaign.
You know, I built a campaign to win, the enthusiasm across the state, folks that I talk to, but also the feedback I hear from folks like this that are out canvassing is very, very positive. I think we're going to have a high voter turnout and a good night.
Kelly is holding a tight lead over Republican challenger Blake Masters. In Georgia, Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock and Republican Herschel Walker are neck and neck. Republican J.D. Vance and Democratic Representative Tim Ryan are in a tight race for the open Ohio Senate seat. Pennsylvania Democrat John Fetterman's lead has slipped to a razor-thin margin against Republican hopeful Dr. Oz. In Nevada, the Senate race between incumbent Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto and Republican Adam Laxalt is locked in a dead heat. It's business as usual in Tampa ahead of Tropical Storm Nicole, which is expected to bring gusty winds and heavy rain after making landfall along Florida's east coast late Wednesday. Mayor Jane Castor says the city has done the usual, including cleaning out stormwater drains.
All of our city departments are on alert. We filled all of our generators. We have done everything that we can to prepare for the worst.
Castor says she doesn't anticipate a major flooding problem and isn't planning to set up sandbag distribution sites at the moment. Nicole could strengthen into a Category 1 hurricane as it approaches the east coast. The forecast calls for it to move northwest as a tropical storm, then turn to the northeast by Friday. The Orlando Sanford International Airport is closing due to Tropical Storm Nicole. Airport officials are asking people not to come to the airport under any circumstances, and they're not offering shelter from the storm. And it turns out one winning Powerball ticket was sold in the Los Angeles area for a jackpot now worth over $2 billion. California lottery officials say the ticket matching all 6 numbers was sold at Joe's Service Center in Altadena, northeast of L.A. It's the largest jackpot in American history. Mark Mayfield, NBC News Radio.
On Season 4 of the Piketon Massacre podcast, the investigation into one of Ohio's worst crimes continues. Join the KT Studios team as they examine the forensics and the ties that bind the victims and the accused. What will the trials mean for Pike County?
Let's talk about the crime scenes.
Accused murderer George Wagner faces a judge and jury.
This is legitimately the biggest murder trial in the state of Ohio's history.
Listen to the Piketon Massacre on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along, which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/free. That's ziprecruiter.com/free. ziprecruiter.com/free.
I adopted Bento in 2010 from a shelter. A lot of people know him as Keyboard Cat.
That's just one adoption story that started at a shelter. Visit theshelterpetproject.org to find a pet near you. Brought to you by Maddie's Fund, the Humane Society of the United States, and the Ad Council.
Always just minutes away from the latest news around town and around the world.
You need to know what's going on.
News Radio 690 KTSM. News Radio 690 KTSM.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for our special election night coverage on Talk El Paso, coming to you for the next hour. Started at 7 o'clock once those local results came out, and waiting for that next update, of course, to bring you more details on the local elections. We have a couple of trajectories looking so far, yes, on Proposition A when it comes to the city of El Paso, and a toss-up for B and C on that total about $270 million overall. So the majority of it, about $242 million, looking so far a yes, but that's with about 20% of the actual registered voters turning out for early voting, waiting on that next update to find out about what's going on with the rest of the electorate and what happened on election day. So in the meantime, I'm going to be checking in on some of those statewide races here in Texas. Of course, some maybe not totally unsurprising trends, but also some we'll be looking at in New Mexico. So to help me try to parse through all of this, we are, of course, joined here in studio right now by Todd Curry, UTEP Professor of Political Science, as well as Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc., as we are going to be talking about, again, both the significance of all of these aspects of it here. So thank you for tuning in with us. If you are, albeit on air, online, live streaming through the free and reliable iHeartRadio app, or joining us over on our various social media, people chiming in over there, a lot of different conversations going in, including Calvin Williams checking in from Amarillo. Do appreciate it. But mostly focused on results here this evening. Of course, we will be bringing more on that. So let's look at specifically for Texas. There is a strong lead currently in place for Republican incumbent Governor Greg Abbott over, of course, Democratic challenger Beto O'Rourke, with Abbott looking at about just shy of about 55% of the vote and O'Rourke sitting at about 44% of the vote. So maybe even getting a little bit further than some of the margins that were being talked about in the recent polling, though technically within the margin of error. And so far, it's looking pretty well. Again, with according to the Texas Secretary of State, about 200 of the about 78% of counties reporting so far, but only about 14% of the vote in. So these things may change throughout the course of the evening, but it's looking like statewide there will not be a change to the current existing situation of Republican statewide control. Todd?
Yeah, I would be willing to say that at the minimum, we're just not going to see any changes. Earlier in the night, it looked like perhaps Ken Paxton was going to have a close race, but that's gone away as the evening has progressed.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing the focus on here is we talked a lot about the fact that removing the ability to vote a straight party ballot was going to have some form of an effect in the state of Texas. And just looking at the percentages straight down the line based on the results that have come in, every Republican candidate has basically the same percentage of vote within a margin of error. So there isn't, it doesn't seem to me that the straight party line voting has really changed, or the removal of it has really changed anything at the statewide level. Democrats aren't doing any better. Republicans aren't doing any worse. It is going to be continued Republican control of the state. And that's really what those of us who are paying attention expected to happen this year.
I mean, that makes a level of sense. And some of the other races that we're going to talk about, a little, at least the federal ones, of course, when we were talking about the Texas 23rd Congressional District, the vote totals in El Paso are one thing, but more specifically, the skins that goes all the way to the outskirts of San Antonio, a lot more, exactly not El Paso in the driver's seat there. What we're looking at there is a kind of a similar story. Tony Gonzalez, the Republican incumbent there, securing 55% of the vote so far, with Democratic challenger John Lira getting about 40%. Notable third-party one there, Frank Lopez Jr., independent run, getting about 4% of the turnout. So not enough to make a difference at this point, but there has been a couple of cases of some of the races we've been keeping our eye on where that might be the case. So more updates coming in there. But then, of course, for New Mexico, we did want to, of course, mention the New Mexico 2nd Congressional District. And in that one, with the previous guest on the show, Yvette Harrell, she is currently trailing behind Democrat challenger Gabriel Vasquez, roughly about 43% for, again, Republican Harrell to 57% for Democrat Gabe Vasquez. This has been one of those kind of, not exactly bellwether, but definitely considered in a lot of the handicapping toss-up seats.
Yeah, this has consistently been a toss-up race. I mean, last election cycle, an incumbent was defeated. It looks like if things pan out this way, another incumbent is going to be defeated. And the reason why, if that's exceedingly notable to me, is incumbents tend not to lose.
This is true.
That means one of the best predictors of success in a congressional election is, are you the incumbent? And the New Mexico 2nd is an outlier, we would say, because it seems the incumbent is more likely to lose, at least if we look at recent data in that area.
And that is true. It almost seems reminiscent of the way the Texas 23rd Congressional District used to be, at least leading up to redistricting, when it was considered essentially a very easy district to be an insurgent in, to kind of try to go in under the existing representation to, say, connect with communities that may have felt disenfranchised or not represented by the current sitting representative, because there was literally so much ground to cover. I mean, it's still, even before this redistricting, was parts of El Paso County, but mostly kind of like San Elizario and parts south, southern, and eastern, not as much of it as it is now, of course. And just given the wide breadth and just how dispersed the population is within that district, it's very easy to kind of go around and find, again, those populations that you could really target and focus on. And that might be what kind of the New Mexico 2nd is turning into, because it is in its own right pretty huge, given that it covers 3 state borders. I mean, the southern border of New Mexico being in its entirety, a good chunk, being about half of the eastern border and about half of the western border.
Yeah, one of the ironies of what you need to do to have a successful campaign is you need to raise a lot of money, but that money is spent differerly if you're in a very small district geographically versus a very large district geographically. And what it means is, I mean, just looking at the other El Paso race, what is it,
the Texas 16th. So we're talking about the 23rd.
Yeah,
that's the Texas 23rd, the one that goes from El Paso to San Antonio, essentially.
You have to advertise in 2 media markets,
Yeah,
whereas the 16th only has to advertise in 1 media market. And so what we're talking about is how we're differently going to spend our money. And it turns out that some districts are more expensive to run in than others. And it seems to me that that's kind of what we're watching here. Veronica Escobar really doesn't have to concern herself with how much money she's going to raise, but Tony Gonzalez absolutely does.
It was very interesting to see, and why we sometimes focus on the actual amount of campaign finance and campaign donations that have been made. The New Mexico 2nd, Southern New Mexico District saw a ton of money, on the order of $2 to $3 million per candidate, being brought into those races here, which was notable in that it's not like central Albuquerque. I mean, there's only 3 congressional districts within New Mexico. So, I mean, there is a lot of money to be spent there on those specific areas. But the fact that this was being focused on so much clearly indicated that there was focus on both wanting to see control or a flip be made, but also the fact of the matter is that it was considered a valuable one to do this in, because there was a lot of course, like national committee dollars being spent there.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to throw your money into races that you have no chance of winning. That's why it always strikes me as funny that nationally folks were throwing money to the Florida Senate race when that was just, it was a non-starter. Rubio was going to win that. It makes a lot of sense to send your money, if you're the DNC or the RNC, to smaller races that are going to be more of a toss-up, because your money is going to be better spent in that area. And the New Mexico 2nd the past couple cycles has been one of those areas where your money is going to get a lot more bang for the buck when it's spent.
Yeah, bang for the buck, and where the actual impact of that is very interesting and very important here. A couple of the ones I want to mention that were being considered, sometimes about the blue wall or the cracking of, or the red tsunami coming in, those southern Texas district ones that kind of, in some cases, abut the Texas 23rd that we were talking about there when we're talking about the House Texas District 28. Henry Cuellar looking in a strong lead there, according to NBC News, 56%. And the Texas 15th Congressional District looking like De La Cruz with a 52% lead over Vallejo at 45%. And then in House District 34, the incumbent there, Gonzalez, 53% over the challenger, Flores, Republican, 43%. So a lot of those still coming in. There were some, particularly in the Houston area, polls didn't close until about El Paso's did. So that was part of the situation there. So we're keeping an eye on some of those, but of course, waiting for some more updates on what will be happening in the El Paso races. But again, a couple ones, particularly city council, as well in the driver's seat whenever it comes to things like putting up these bonds, the ones, the A, B, and C that we've been talking about, Robbie. And we talked a bit about district number 1 there so far, and how we're looking at maybe not a runoff if there is a lot of movement in favor of the current frontrunner in that race. Of course, Brian Kennedy may work out. The real question for him is if he can avoid the runoff at this point. But then again, there is that also kind of lingering question now for one of the other districts as well, district number 6, with incumbent Claudia Lizette Rodriguez sitting at about, again, based on the unofficial early voting results, about 42%, with Art Fierro, again, notably the most recently a state representative, moving into instead the city council races.
Yeah, that's correct. Through the redistricting process, he was districted out, and it looks like that may be one of the races we see go to a runoff. I mean, at this point, we're waiting for the election day results that haven't come in yet. Hopefully, they'll be in here shortly, but it looks like that is one of the races that might be into a runoff. And then looking at District 8 as well, that is a possibility. Possibility there as well.
Notably that there was actually a percent turnout for a write-in candidate in that one. I mean, not exactly a resounding success in that effort, but even getting a percent is interesting enough. But I mean, so we got the potential for a few runoffs, at least based on the initial numbers. The only one looking very strong specifically is incumbent Isabel Salcido in district number 5, with, again, based on the early voting results numbers, about 65%. And then pretty closely, well, in their own positions, but not exactly close behind, would be Richard Gennaro with about 18% and Felix Munoz with 15%. So this is, again, based on the unofficial early voting results. So still waiting to see if we can get any more detail on what exactly is going to be going on with the election day results, giving us hopefully a clearer picture of what exactly the trajectory is going to be for these. Still about 20% voter turnout. The potential, historically speaking, of there having been about another 100,000 people who voted today. That's the real question for me at this point. So we'll take another look at that here shortly, but got to take that next break of this hour right now. Again, joining me here in studio is Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, as well as Robbie Gray, editor of El Pasoing. We'll be back with more here on this special election night coverage here on Talk El Paso on News Radio 690 KTSM.
The midterms are here. With so much at stake, MSNBC has the in-depth coverage and analysis you need. Our reporters are on the ground. Steve Kornacki is at the big board breaking down the races. On election night, Rachel Maddow and our Decision 2022 team will give you a greater understanding as results come in. And the next day, Morning Joe will provide perspective on what it all means for the future of our country. Watch coverage of the 2022 midterms, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
Patrick Tuttle of Coldwell Banker Heritage knows a secret. It's the power of the Coldwell Banker Real Vitalize program, which helps you fix up your home for sale with no out-of-pocket or participation costs to you. Home improvements, cleanup, and repair costs are covered and are paid back when your home sells. There's no catch, no hidden fees, interest, or markups. Let Patrick Tuttle of Coldwell Banker Heritage Real Estate in El Paso help you real vitalize before selling. Call him today at 915-585-7777.
El Paso, Ivan Ochoa, General Manager of Sunland Park Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram Fiat. Right now, our inventory of new and certified pre-owned vehicles is better than ever. So our goal this month is to break our all-time sales record. We'll do whatever it takes to make a deal.
It's Ram Power Days at Sunland Park Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat, and our savings and inventory are huge. Upside down in your current trade? We want it, even if you owe thousands more than it's worth, regardless of make or model. So you can drive home a new or certified pre-owned vehicle for less. For a limited time, get 2.9% APR on the all-new 2022 Ram, or get 0% APR on the all-new 2022 full-size Wagoneer SUV with third-row seating. Plus, we have great financing programs for good credit or less than perfect credit. All military personnel and first responders receive an additional discount. Thank you for your service. Sunland Park Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat, where buying a car is fun at I-10 at Sunland Park Drive or online at sunlandparkdodge.com. Estamos en tu esquina, El Paso. El Paso Strong. Includes factory rebate and dealer discount plus T10L. 0 APR for 36 months is $27.78 per thousand finance on select vehicles with approved credit. Offers not combined.
New on Curiosity Stream, the Nazis' true strength was their propaganda.
You had posters, you had banners, you had music.
See how a mastery of messaging galvanized Hitler's march to power in Project Nazi Blueprints of Evil. And if space is the final frontier, is it destined to be monetized? The battle between space exploration and galactic capitalism may have already begun. Don't miss Space Greed. Watch now on Curiosity Stream. Annual plans are $20, just $1.67 a month. Visit curiositystream.com.
Veterans, are you planning to file a VA disability claim? Get ready for a better way to file. The Decision Ready Claim Program gets you a decision within 30 days after it's submitted. That's just 30 days for the benefits and services you've earned. Talk to your accredited representative or go to www.benefits.va.gov/DRC to learn more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
News Radio 690 KTSM.
Thank you all very much for joining us here for Talk El Paso in this special election night coverage, bringing you live results through the, coming up for this next hour here on air since 7 p.m. And we'll be going for at least another half hour and change here. Of course, joined here in studio to help me break down all of these results and the impacts here are UTEP professor Todd Curry of political science, as well as Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc. So we got a lot of stuff that we're breaking down here, still waiting for that next update, hopefully coming soon to find out what the local election night results are. Still having that trends from early voting that are, well, useful in their own right, but very hungry and hoping to find out more from you there. But there's still a lot more to break down, including, of course, that balance of power of where exactly the House is looking at. Still on a trajectory, so to speak, towards it being more in GOP control, but only time will tell there. The real question whenever it comes to the Senate seats, them, of course, not all up being for grabs this time around, given that only about a third of them are. So that is something that we'll be keeping our eye on as well. So as soon as we get more of the election results, we're going to be delving even further into those. But Todd, we were talking a little bit during the break about the potential there. Again, it's been pretty well handicapped that the House will likely fall into Republican control. That is very much expected at this point. How deeply is the real remaining question? But in the Senate, it's not as clear of a picture. Most of the handicapping and exit polling, those kind of things, have had it pretty well near even now as a toss-up. And so that's some of what you're looking at as well, right?
Yeah, so we were coming into the night with a 51-49 sort of toss-up, or 51-49 Democratic majority. And looking at what is going on right now, some of the contested races that were pretty big. In Florida, Marco Rubio is going to win in a blowout. But in North Carolina, Ted Budd is just over 50% right of the vote right now over Cheryl Beasley for the Senate race there. So that is a Republican in the lead. In Pennsylvania, Fetterman is ahead of Dr. Oz right now with about 50% of the vote turning in. With about 70% of the vote turning in Ohio, J.D. Vance is ahead of Tim Ryan. And with close to 70% in Georgia, both candidates are below 50% of the vote, which, as we were talking earlier, that would trigger an automatic runoff. And considering there are only 3 candidates, it the runoff would be another get out the vote effort in December.
Yeah.
But right now, Herschel Walker is in the lead with 49.5% of the vote. But this is margin of error stuff. This is the last election cycle all over again, looking to what's going to happen in Georgia again.
Yeah, a lot more focus potentially on Georgia from that standpoint. I mean, at the very least, we're talking about triggering recounts and then potentially whole new campaigns like you're talking about. So Georgia just desperate for the attention as ever. And I mean, there's still a number of Senate seats that are still being questioned here at Wisconsin. Want to mention, like I said, Barnes, 51% over Johnson. Iowa, even, it's considered very likely Republican, but Chuck Grassley currently at 41% over Democratic challenger Mike Franken, 49%. So there's still a few in play, some potentials for change here that I'll have to be looking at for the rest of the night. Iowa only about 42% reporting so far. Wisconsin about 49%. So there's a lot more to be looked at this year. I mean, some conversation about Herschel Walker in Georgia, but the possibility of essentially campaign part 2 coming out there. And that essentially going back to, again, this is deja vu all over again, going back to, like you said, the previous election where it just ever so happened to be Eastern Seaboard and Georgia specifically making that was the control right there and had set up the situation that we've been in for the last 2 years of that 50+1 control kind of in air quotes here of the Senate.
Yeah, and I hadn't seen the preliminary results coming out of Wisconsin, but right now the Democratic challenger is in the lead over Ron Johnson with about 50% of the vote in. And I mean, we're looking again at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and what happens in Arizona, which sounds exactly like what we were talking about 2 years ago when I was sitting in here, except we were talking about the Electoral College and not so much the Senate. But it seems to be the same states are going to play a role in determining the outcome of the federal government. In this case, talking solely about the Senate, because I agree with you. I think the House of Representatives is highly likely to flip partisan alignment in this cycle, but the Senate plays a huge role. If we just look at judicial nominations, they play a monumental role in what the federal judiciary does. And if you can keep control, the Democrats can keep control in the Senate, then they have an easier path forward than having lost both houses of Congress.
I mean, anyone will, of course, confound some of the efforts going on. And, of course, committee hearings at the very least or investigations going on are definitely a part of kind of the background of conversation nationally here, but the control of Congress is something else that we will keep our eye on. At least one other thing I want to make sure that we talk about here is some of those other local ballot issues. Again, not as much focus in just because it's been a very crowded election here, but Robbie, particularly when we're talking a little bit about the idea of bond fatigue a little bit earlier and the idea of there being people concerned about taxes and things and those kind of things. I mean, the city of El Paso's bond here, it looking like it'll be probably, again, based on just the early voting results numbers, probably yes on the streets and roads amounts and a toss-up at this point whenever it comes to the other two. We'll see what the first election day results point out there. But particularly for Canutillo Independent School District, this has been a situation where this is basically a revamp of their previous bond effort as well. They were about $180 million on the last ballot, and so they've come back out with this one now with the two parts of it there. Are you sensing basically what you talked about previously, that idea of fatigue, that idea of people being concerned about taxes? We have seen some notable efforts in relation to bonds and taxes, including, of course, not directly related to Canutillo Independent School District, but in the county of El Paso, that successful petition effort to stop the moving forward of a University Medical Center County Hospital District effort. I guess, do you see this potentially being in that vein?
Right. I don't know if I'd overstate it here,
fair
but
enough.
the largest portion of this bond, which is devoted to roads, does look like, with these initial results at least, that it could pass, and that would be the largest chunk. But El Pasoans might be willing to put money towards something as essential as roads that we use every day. The pitch for sort of more quality of life amenities that are a little softer, like parks, or a climate change plan might be a harder sell as folks are concerned about taxes and costs. And right, you mentioned the UMC's effort to pass non-voter approved bonds that provoked quite a backlash. And that was prevented from happening. And a lot of talk of concerns about tax increases with home valuations, particularly with the city. So I think you are correct. I think there is some concerns and fatigue about just how much money we're spending on everything from groceries to our taxes, and that might be weighing into it.
At the very least, this that whole phrasing that you used there, the idea of voter approved versus non-voter approved debt, that has been, well, a conversation for a minute now. Of course, it has come up previously with the city of El Paso on its own. Well before this election cycle came up, there was, of course, that potential for, I think it was roughly being talked about in the $100 million range, like low or like right at $100 million of city certificates of obligation that had been proposed. And that was where some of those mayoral vetoes ended up coming down, and not overriding of that one, but of course there were other vetoes that came in when it came to the city manager and those contracts kind of things here. So that's, again, a point, because it almost begs the question whenever we say the phrase non-voter approved debt about, then, well, is it supposed to be? It kind of begs the question for me of, okay, but how does this actually work? Because essentially, when we're talking about bonds, we've got two different types here. We've got certificates of obligation, which can just be issued by whatever entity is able and tasked with that and has its own tax rate that goes in with it. But then there's the general obligation bonds, which are the bonds that probably the average voter is more familiar with, because those are the ones that go onto the ballot. So I guess the undertone I kind of get whenever the phrase non-voter approved debt comes up is the idea that, well, therefore, are they doing something wrong or illegal or against the law, so to speak? And that's not exactly the case, even if it may be, even just through that phrasing, kind of begging that question.
Well, I think it comes down more to a matter of opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, the certificates of obligation are generally targeted towards things considered essential that you need. And, often for things that are less essential, like, say, an multipurpose event center, like an arena, or sort of these quality of life issues, you see more of those being general obligation bonds and put towards the voters, so they have an opportunity to decide whether their taxes should go to that or not.
Absolutely. So that's going to take us through that next break right now. Coming out of this break, we got a lot of interesting points being made over on our social media if you want to chime in there, but looking more at some of those balance of power questions whenever it comes to the Senate and, of course, the House of Representatives. So, of course, joining me here in studio, we do have Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Ing. So taking on more of these and some even election callings being done, including the gubernatorial race here in Texas. So stay tuned for more on Talk El Paso special election night coverage here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
El Paso's News Radio 690 KTSM.
From the Texas Decision Desk, I'm Michael Board. Incumbent Republican Governor Greg Abbott is cruising towards re-election. The only question now will be, how big of a victory will it be? With 75% of counties reporting he's up 10%. Fellow Republicans Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton, the Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General, are looking like they will win re-election as well. Democrats have not won a statewide race in 28 years, and it's unlikely to happen this year either. Down ballot, Democrats are seeing success along the border. Congressman Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez, both incumbents, are winning. The GOP has tried to make a push for border Hispanics. Republican congressional candidate Monica de la Cruz is winning her bid for an open seat along the border. And in Houston, Harris County Democratic Judge Lena Hidalgo maintains her razor-thin lead in her bid for re-election there. I'm Michael Board from the Texas Decision Desk.
From the KFOX 14 Severe Weather Center, this is Chief Meteorologist Sandra Diaz. Our next weather maker is set to arrive overnight Wednesday. Now, that's when the colder air begins to move in time for Thursday. But in the meantime, we will have winds increasing through the day on Wednesday. Once the front passes through, the winds will gradually decrease on Friday. Log on to kfoxtv.com for your latest forecast.
You wash your hands, you brush your teeth, but what about the nose? How do you clean your nose? With Navage. Navage uses powered suction to pull saline in one nostril, around the back of the nose, and out the other nostril, flushing out allergens, mucus, and germs. And it's why cleaning your nose, the body's air filter, is the next evolution in daily personal hygiene. People try Navage for lots of reasons: sinusitis, colds, allergies, snoring. things that make it hard to breathe through your nose. But over time, they find that cleaning their nose makes them feel better, a lot better. Over 3 million Navage users have written more than 100,000 reviews, averaging 4.7 stars, saying, best product I've ever used, and amazing, I love my Navage. Navage helps you breathe better, sleep deeper, and snore less, but the biggest payoff is improved health. Navage is good personal hygiene and can help you stay healthier. At Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Target, and online. Navage, N-A-V-A-G-E, clean nose, healthy life.
Help the planet with a tip from iHeartRadio Earth. Education doesn't just take place in the classroom. There are many ways for children of all ages to learn about sustainability and environmental education at home. Visit iHeartRadio.com/Earth for a list of resources, activity guides, and toolkits that are educational and fun for the whole family. Brought to you by iHeartRadio Earth and the National Environmental Education Foundation. To find more tips for smarter, sustainable living, or to take action in your own community, go to iHeartRadio.com/Earth.
The El Paso History Show with Andrew J. Polk is 10 a.m. Saturday, November 12th, with Ruben Escandone and the annual pilgrimage on Mount Cristo Rey. This year in November, the El Paso History Show is sponsored by Patrick Tuttle Coldwell Banker Heritage Real Estate, Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant in Cañutillo, Mission Del Rey Southwest for souvenirs, decor, and gift shopping, and by M1EP Management Corporation. Saturday morning at 10 a.m. on News Radio 690 and on Facebook and YouTube.
Attention! If you have a current insurance plan, you are eligible to receive up to 8 COVID-19 tests shipped to your home or business each month, absolutely free. Per the current government mandate, U.S.-based insurers are now required to cover at-home COVID testing kits every month with no out-of-pocket fees to you. Just visit getyourfreetest.com to begin the registration process. When completed, Tiero Health, a trusted source for next-generation healthcare, will submit a claim to your insurance provider. Your 8 monthly tests will ship directly to your home or business for free. Go to getyourfreetest.com. There's no deductible and no copay. COVID-19 and its variants are still here, so give yourself peace of mind by registering you and your family for free time-sensitive tests today. Visit getyourfreetest.com to register from the comfort of your own home. That's getyourfreetest.com to receive 8 COVID-19 tests shipped to you at no cost. Just visit getyourfreetest.com.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along, which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/free. That's ziprecruiter.com/free. ziprecruiter.com/free.
News Radio 690 KTSM El Paso.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for Talk El Paso special election night coverage, coming to you live here on News Radio 690 KTSM, breaking down some of the results, what we're looking at, and those races that we have been keeping our eye on. Do have some slight updates coming out, not huge numbers coming out from the election night's actual results so far, but we'll keep breaking those down here as we are, of course, joined here in studio by Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, as well as Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc., delving through the numbers and figuring it out. Currently still, even with this update on the trajectory for a few potential runoffs in City of El Paso races, District 1, District 6, and District 8, all currently, as the way they are set, looking like there will be another crack at it by the voters in the coming days and months. So that's at least one of the concerns we got going on here. But as we're actually coming into this, we are seeing that national news partners are calling a very significant race. The governor's race now being called here in Texas by NBC News. It is being called in favor of Republican incumbent Greg Abbott, with so far, and according to the Texas Secretary of State, latest update there, with approximately still about 22% of the vote in, but 83% of counties reporting so far, looking like Abbott with 56% of the vote over O'Rourke's 42%. Some more of the handicapping coming in from, again, national news partners, including NBC, pointing to about 54 to 44% Abbott over O'Rourke. So that race now being called with a bit more of those results coming in than the Texas Secretary of State was reporting on their website so far, being called in favor of the incumbent Greg Abbott. So, of course, this does raise some questions about what happens next for both that political machine as well as the candidate of O'Rourke. But there are some other interesting results, including in New Mexico, both within the actual governor's race. There are still being considered a little bit too close to call, but very much in the lead. Michelle Lujan Grisham, Democrat incumbent there with about 55% to Republican challenger Mark Ronchetti. But a very interesting trend now emerging and looking pretty strong at this point whenever it comes to the congressional representation within the land of enchantment. Right, Todd?
Yeah, so we've been talking about the second district because it's our neighbor. But as I was scrolling through, I noticed that the third district, which is kind of the northern part of New Mexico, a Republican incumbent is also being defeated there. So that what that means is if the results hold that we're looking at, New Mexico will be represented by 3 Democrats in the House of Representatives, with 2 incumbents losing their races, and that's a pretty pronounced trend from our neighbors in New Mexico. That is shocking. I didn't expect both races to be flipped like that. None of the polling data really led me to believe that would be the case. So if the results hold, this would be one of those races that Democrats weren't actually betting on flopping.
Yeah, and how that will affect the actual control of Congress here is, again, that'll be a question that will come a little bit further in, but also now the governor's race for New Mexico being called as well, as we have just been in this segment right now, with about 86% of the results in so far. Michelle Lujan Grisham, NBC News, is predicting that she will retain the governor's seat, defeating, again, Republican challenger Mark Ronchetti. So very different situations on either side of the state line here in Texas and New Mexico. Of course, we'll keep our eye on that. But of course, we're at questions about what's going on in the Senate seat, including one of the Missouri seats, looking like it is now being called as well for Republican Eric Schmidt. So a lot of moving parts in this, but at least a couple of the other races that we wanted to make sure we mention here when it comes to the county, because the county races, we haven't touched as much on those here. Even with this update, still a strong trend in favor of, well, an incumbent and of a challenger, looking like some strong Democrat control going to be happening within the county of El Paso so far. Right, Robbie?
Yeah, so looking at the initial results here, we have the incumbent county judge Samaniego with just about 70% of the vote, with the independent challenger Guadalupe Geiner at 30.58% here. Also have the county commissioner 4 race as well. Looking there, like the Democrat Coronado is at 57%, and the Republican Blanca Trout is at 42%.
So again, a strong trend there. There hasn't been a ton of new votes coming in with this 8:30 update from the unofficial election results, but we'll of course be delving more into that. But so again, Guadalupe here and there, and of course the incumbent, as you mentioned there, with the El Paso County judge, that of course, Ricardo Samaniego, looking like he will having a very strong position in this race so far. And again, Blanca Trout over Sergio Coronado. Blanca Trout falling so far 42%, so Sergio Coronado's 59.5%. Also worth being noted that, of course, in the actual commissioner's precinct number 2, that of David Stout has been declared elected already. Anyone who went ahead and scrolled through and read all of that at the end of the ballot there. Saw that already because he did not have any challenger past the primary and into the general election. But again, so the governor's races for our coverage area being called as of this moment. Again, we are going to be looking at both of the governors retaining their seats and their positions in the governor's mansions here. Of course, Abbott, Republican here in Texas, and Lujan Grisham, Democrat in New Mexico. So those are just some of the stories that are developing here tonight. At least want to check in on those House results so far. We are looking at, as it currently stands, of the races being called, again, by NBC. We're looking at the GOP with about 157 seats secured so far, and Democrats 94. But of course, those New Mexico races haven't been called technically just yet, but again, strong trends in favor of Democrats at this moment within those races and within all the districts there in New Mexico. So we'll, of course, be keeping our eye on those there as we get a little bit further in. But there are, again, some strong trends against incumbents, or, well, kind of, there's one incumbent, but against the Republican incumbents. And actually, as we were talking about this, New Mexico House number 1, Stansbury, the Democrat incumbent in that case, that race being called in favor of them. And it looks like we'll probably be closing in on it in the other two. Again, for New Mexico, as they're above 50% vote turnout so far. So still a complicated painting of who will retain control of the House being good done there. But of course, those Senate races are the really key and what will be coming out of here tonight. A lot of them still being considered too close to call. So that'll take us through that next break right now, because of course, a lot more to be gone through tonight, and taking you through 9 p.m. as we are. Again, joining me here in studio, Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science, Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Week, talking maybe a little bit more about some of those local implications coming out after this break, with more on this special election coverage here on News Radio 690 KTSM.
Hey, El Paso, Ivan Ochoa, General Manager of Sunland Park Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram Fiat. Right now, our inventory of new and certified pre-owned vehicles is better than ever. So our goal this month is to break our all-time sales record. We'll do whatever it takes to make a deal.
It's Ram Power Days at Sunland Park Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat, and our savings and inventory are huge. Upside down in your current trade? We want it, even if you owe thousands more than it's worth, regardless of make or model. So you can drive home a new or certified pre-owned vehicle for less. For a limited time, get 2.9% APR on the all-new 2022 Ram, or get 0% APR on the all-new 2022 full-size Wagoneer SUV with third-row seating. Plus, we have great financing programs for good credit or less than perfect credit. All military personnel and first responders receive an additional discount. Thank you for your service. Sunland Park Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, Fiat, where buying a car is fun at I-10 at Sunland Park Drive or online at sunlandparkdodge.com. Estamos en tu esquina, El Paso. El Paso Strong. Includes factory rebate and dealer discount plus T10L. 0 APR for 36 months is $27.78 per thousand finance on select vehicles with approved credit. Offers not combined.
Get ready for the smartest bundle in streaming. 6 streaming services for the intellectually curious, featuring Curiosity Stream with the best collection of documentary films and TV shows, Psalm TV, and great stories from the world of wine, Tastemade for the fun side of food and travel, Topic with the best thrillers and crime stories, and so much more. From nature to history, technology to food, mystery to adventure. Get 6 streaming services for one low price at less than $6 a month. It's the best deal in streaming. Learn more and sign up now at smartbundle.com.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along, which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ziprecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to this exclusive web address, ziprecruiter.com/free. That's ziprecruiter.com/free. ZipRecruiter.com/free.
Because you never hear this.
Hey, hon, I'm late. Chris, I am so pleased you missed the beginning of our meeting.
Thanks for making me wait, Dad. I talked to a lot of strangers.
Check on your commute. Stay informed. Traffic and weather all day. Or you might never hear the end of it.
Well, you were late to our anniversary dinner that one time.
Yes, how could I forget?
El Paso's News Radio 690 KTSM. El Paso's News Radio 690 KTSM.
Thank you all so very much for joining us here for this special election night coverage brought to you by Talk El Paso. I am your host, Andrew J. Polk. Thank you very much for tuning in, however you may be doing so, be it on air, online, live streaming through the free and reliable iHeartRadio app, or joining us over on the various social media pages. Have had a lot of conversations going on there, but we've been laser focused on the results as they are. Some trends, of course, emerging, the potential for a few runoffs with the city of El Paso, well, city council races, but of course, some other big questions going on, and questions that may not even be answered this evening, whenever it comes to some of those ballot propositions, the extra money being spent, the bonds, so a lot more to be answered as we get through the rest of this night. But of course, having joined me here in studio, we have had UTEP Professor of Political Science Todd Curry, as well as editor of El Paso Inc., Robbie Gray. Thank you all very much for being with us here to talk about and break down some of these results.
Absolutely.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you all on, because as much as there have been a lot of the numbers has been the primary focus, obviously, there's been a lot more story behind the numbers, including particularly with these city council races. We've had some minor updates so far. The 830 added a couple thousand more votes, essentially, so far. So not exactly a clearer picture at this point, and so it'll probably be not until we get much later into the evening that we get the very clear idea of what is going on with these. At the moment, we are on the trajectory to have 3 runoffs within city of El Paso city council races, specifically that in District 1, which is the one that could be more or less anticipated as going to a runoff, as there were 6 competitive candidates, 1 dropped out candidate who is still ahead of a couple other candidates on the ballot there. So the impact of dollars being meant, the candidate we're talking about there, Freddie Cleo Avalos, did supposedly, as of election day, throw his support behind the current frontrunner in that race, Brian Kennedy. Though, of course, people still cast their ballot for him, but those are, of course, the early voting results. Whether that made an impact for election day can only be seen. But Brian Kennedy so far only sitting at 42% of the vote. So potentially, as more results come in within striking distance of avoiding the runoff, but if it does not, he's not able to get that extra 8% of the total vote out turnout, he will be facing down at the current moment Annalisa Cordova Silverstein, with her about 2-1 so far, 6,000 and change votes versus about 3,600 votes for Kennedy versus Cordova Silverstein. And of course, we had them both previously on the program to talk about that. So in the coming days, we may have more on their interviews from then. The only one that's really looking secure at this point, Representative City of El Paso, District Number 5, Isabel Salcido, at this point, handily avoiding it, but we'll see what happens with more results come in with about 65% of the vote. And then this one was kind of surprising to me that, again, another incumbent, Representative District 6, Claudia Lizette Rodriguez, now looking in the same kind of position of potentially going to a runoff versus Art Fierro, the previous state representative. So that situation, I mean, he moving into that race, there has been some kind of back and forth between both current and previous state representatives. There was the potential movement from a previous state rep in a other race. I think it was actually District Number 1, if I'm not mistaken. But with that race and that going to that runoff, I mean, that will be a very interesting one to keep our eye on for the runoff, right, Robbie, in District Number 6?
Yeah, that'll be one that we're certainly looking at there, because you have the former state rep, Art Fierro, and then you have the incumbent city representative Rodriguez. So I think that will be an interesting race to watch.
And of course, she has been doing more than a little bit of some national attention, not exactly on this race, but in some of the conversations, of course, including city council and the decisions that have been made in terms of particularly, say, the migrant crisis and that dashboard there. And of course, don't want to forget to mention District 8, where we do have currently in the lead, that being the unoccupied seat, Bettina Olivares at about 40%, Chris Canales at about 32%, and Rich Wright at about 26%. So a few runoffs. So we may be doing this again in a month or so. Very short order where this comes back up. But that's, of course, just when it comes to the City of El Paso representatives. I do want to take at this point a moment to mention the one competitive Justice of the Peace race here. Ida Beza Gardner, previous guest on the show, getting about 42% of Republican versus Democrat Humberto Beto Enriquez with about 57% of the, at this point in time. At least one point I wanted to get to here was being brought up. That was we were discussing about the idea of elected justices or elected judges, because there are, of course, a number of those statewide on here, not that much focused on, but, well, they kind of have an argument, Todd, that we were talking about why people should care about it, right?
Yeah, so electing judges is an American enterprise. It's something that happens in 36 states in the United States. We elect judges. In the state of Texas, we elect them on a partisan ballot, which is exceedingly useful for voters because we could generally consider them low salience elections. But with party ID, the average voter can be cued in about whom they would want to vote for without knowing anything about them. But what it means is our judges are more closely attached to whatever the electorate wants. They behave like representatives. And at the state level, that connection between ideology and judging is to be encouraged if you believe like I do.
Fair enough here. So some of that question coming up. At least one other race I want to mention here as well, because, of course, also previous guests on the program, Jeff Alley, a Republican there for the 8th Court of Appeals, 2 unexpired term, looking like at the current moment trailing behind the Democrat Lisa Soto, about 65% for Soto versus 34% for Alley. And, of course, want to mention a couple of those Texas state House representatives for State Rep District 74, Catherine Parker, at the moment falling below Eddie Morales, but that is one of those ones that is also not exactly entire in this area. In the State Senate District race, Cesar Blanco looking at about 66% over Republican Derek Zubeldia, about 33%. And then in District number 75, Mary Gonzalez, the incumbent there, over a Libertarian, actually, Jonathan Mullins, about 76% rather, versus 23%. So some of these races showing strong trends, and certain expectations can be had on the turnout there, but otherwise a lot more that we're going to have to be looking at through a lot more of the evening. And so, no, a lot of questions still to be had, even as we are getting close to concluding our election coverage here. So, gentlemen, want to ask you one last time here, as we are having only about 34% or 34 voting centers, 22% of the local results out so far. Any big surprises for you all, or any big, anything that you were expecting at this point so far? Robbie?
No surprises for me here. I mean, the expectation was we were going to have a lot of runoffs, and of course, we're just looking at initial results here, but it looks like we are going to have a lot of runoffs. So there's going to be plenty of coverage of this going forward, and we're going to be back around doing another election. It'll be interesting to see what turnout is. Usually it's very, very low in runoff elections. So no surprise there. Statewide, I think, Beto O'Rourke had a very uphill kind of climb there. Perhaps the spread by how much he may be losing here to Abbott is a little bit of a surprise. But I don't think that was unexpected either. So no surprises for me here.
Todd?
Yeah, not locally, really. I'm looking at no surprises. I think the one candidate that I was looking at that might have the possibility to have an upset was in the county commissioner's race. I thought Blanca Trout had a chance just because of the amount of money that she was spending and the amount of money she had on hand. But if the results currently hold, it's closer than I would have anticipated, but the Democrat is still going to win there if the numbers play out. And so locally, this is largely what we would have expected. Statewide, this is also largely what we would have expected. And so, again, individuals from the state of Texas are left looking longingly to states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona to see what is going to happen at the federal side of things, because the results in Texas are almost always predetermined before the day. We generally know what the outcome is going to be.
I guess the only real surprise of the evening then may be the outcome in those both the governor's mansion as well as the congressional representation for the state of New Mexico, looking like, again, current trends. We'll have to see that throughout the rest of the evening. Only one race called so far by our, of course, national news partners with NBC News, but looking like that both in the New Mexico 2nd Congressional District, maybe getting a little bit tighter, but Gabe Vasquez, the Democratic challenger, clearly in the lead so far, as well as in the New Mexico House District number number 3, the Northern New Mexico District, about 53% for Ledger Fernandez versus 46%. That's the Democrat there versus the Republican Martinez Johnson. And of course, Gabe Vodquez, Democrat, 51.5% versus Yvette Harrell, Republican incumbent, about 48%. So something we'll have to take our look at there and kind of where that puts us with the total so far. About 158 races called so far for Republicans, about 98 for Democrats, and of course 218, the number being sought by either in order to get control of that. So I want to thank both our guests that have been coming here with me in the studio today, Robbie Gray, editor of El Paso Inc., as well as Todd Curry, UTEP professor of political science. Thank you very much for having joined us here to talk about these results and where we stand at the end of the local results here right now.
Was happy to be here tonight.
It was good to be here. Thanks, Andrew.
Absolutely appreciate that, y'all. And thank you all for joining us here for more. And we'll be back with you again next week. So stay tuned for more on Talk El Paso. Appreciate y'all being with us, and make sure to stay aware. We have updates from our news partners there. So have a great evening, y'all.
The El Paso History Show with Andrew J. Polk is 10 a.m. Saturday, November 12th, with Ruben Escandone and the annual pilgrimage on Mount Cristo Rey, this year in November. The El Paso History Show is sponsored by Patrick Tuttle, Coldwell Banker Heritage Real Estate, Pepe's New Mexican Restaurant in Cañutillo, Mission Del Rey Southwest for souvenirs, decor,
News
and
on
gift
the
shopping,
hour and a half.
M1
Traffic and
ET
weather all day. News
Saturday
Radio
morning, 10 a.m.
690
on News
is
Radio
KTSM
690 and on
AM
Facebook
El
and
Paso
YouTube.
and iHeartRadio.
The midterms are here. With so much at stake, MSNBC has the in-depth coverage and analysis to give you a greater understanding. Watch coverage of the 2022 midterms, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC.
Portions of the following program were pre-recorded.
NBC News Radio, I'm Mark Mayfield. Polls are closing in several more states at this hour. This includes Arizona, where Republican Carrie Lake is locked in a tight race with Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs for governor. Incumbent Senator Mark Kelly is holding a tight lead over Republican challenger Blake Masters. New York Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul is facing an unexpectedly strong challenge from Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says his state chose facts over fear over his projected reelection. DeSantis said Florida was a safe haven and a beacon of hope during the coronavirus pandemic and said the results speak for themselves.
We saw freedom in our very way of life, and so many other jurisdictions in this country wither on the vine. Florida held the line.
NBC News projects DeSantis will defeat Democrat Charlie Crist. The governor cheered that freedom is here to stay in the state of Florida. He added his campaign was the best one ever run in the state of Florida. Republican Marco Rubio is the projected winner in the Florida Senate race.
Obviously, I'm grateful for winning an election, but I'm really grateful for all the blessings I've been given, the friendships, obviously the family, this extraordinary honor to represent this extraordinary state, and the chance to be a citizen of the greatest country in the history of mankind.
A judge is denying a request by Republicans to extend voting hours in Maricopa County, Arizona. A coalition of Republicans, including the Republican National Committee, filed the motion requesting all voting centers in the county stay open until 10 p.m. local due to long wait times caused by voting machine issues. Election officials in Maricopa County said about 20% of the county's vote tabulation machines were having issues on Tuesday morning. Officials said printer settings were to blame. And Maura Healey is projected to be the new governor of Massachusetts. NBC News reports the Democratic candidate will beat out her Republican opponent, Jeff Deal, and become the nation's first openly lesbian governor. Healey has been Attorney General for Massachusetts since